This is going to ruffle some feathers, but is metagaming actually bad?
I don't think so. Hey, welcome to Den. I'm Brad Wolf, and I'm here with Mike, and we are talking about myths in Dungeons and Dragons. Metagaming is bad.
Ooh,
So what are your
pot?
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on metagaming?
So there's two different styles in my mind, about metagaming specifically. Metagaming, for those who don't know, it's about the disconnect of player knowledge versus in-character knowledge, right? I think that there's a bad and a good style of metagaming, whereas, like in combat, you're going to use a spell that you think is effective. Now, a bad style of that is like, maybe your character knows this. Maybe your character is like, oh, I've seen these or read about these creatures. They hate fire. So you start using fire spells. Whereas like, if you're using your character knowledge to inject information into your player knowledge to inject things into the character, like, oh, I know that if I do this, they can't regenerate and blah, 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 but there's no reason for your character to know that. That's kind of iffy. That's on the iffy side. But the really bad kind of metagaming that I've experienced before, where we had to like, oh, hold on, pump the brakes, is, something happens with one of the characters that's a very secret or an intimate thing or moment or something that they perceived or they did, and hidden from the other characters entirely. And then the other characters will be like, so for example, I'll just throw out a random example. Let's say a rogue pickpocketed an NPC that the players liked, got their gold, and they got with it scot-free. No one saw it, and they're just going along and just doing their thing. And like, let's say right after that encounter, one of the players, not the characters, but the players is kind of like agitated, or they're like, oh, this happened, I got to stop this. And let's say they're a paladin, and they're like, hey, without perceiving anything, I see that your pocket's bulging. What's in there? Is that gold, or are you just happy to see me? Where do you get that gold? Did you steal that gold? Like, that kind of metagaming is like, okay, you broke the fourth wall. You've gone over something that you didn't notice, you didn't perceive, and you're just trying to get either the gold spread out between the party, or just return this thing that this other player just succeeded on. Another example of the bad metagaming would be like, this would be a really bad one, would be if you are running a module like Curse of Strahd or whatever popular ones that have, a pre-built thing or secrets to it. If you're a person that has run it before, and you're just going through it just like, oh yeah, this lever, this candlestick, blah, 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 without, you shouldn't know any of this stuff, So I guess, yeah, I'll touch on the bad metagaming first, get your opinion on it, and then I'll kind of jump into what I think kind of more good metagaming could be.
Right. And that's, you're exactly right. Those are all good examples of the bad metagaming that people complain about, right?
Yeah.
It's either using, like you said, using that player knowledge in a situation where their character is doing something and the character wouldn't have that knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the type of metagaming that gets labeled as bad and problematic. And for a long time, that was the definition of metagaming. Those examples, those kind of things, that was metagaming. It wasn't until more recently that people were kind of like, well, wait a second. If we're really talking about meta, right? We're really talking about the game outside the game or the game within the game, right? Not all of it's bad, So what are your thoughts on the good side of metagaming?
I would say just things that can, I guess specifically it could be kind of combat sided, where it's like, I just think of things that might like speed something along, or try to simplify certain things. Like, let's say you're in a ruins, right? And you're playing, and this is kind of a disconnect thing. This is kind of a fourth wall, observing your character playing instead of you on the battlefield. You're not acting out, every slash, but as far as like you see from a top down view, let's say there's corridors, walls, whatever, and you're wanting to use a fireball. You as a player could place it specifically to be like, oh, I can get this one that's like around the corner or whatever, because you as a player can see this other monster. Whereas that's just tactical board play, as opposed to like you're not like breaking the game by being like, oh, I sense a monster around the corner, therefore I'm placing it 20 yards past this first one that I see instead of centering it on this first one. In my eyes, I feel like that's fine. I feel like even the DM is kind of getting the god view anyways. They're gonna make their monsters like, all right, it wraps the corner around your party, like it knew you were there anyways. And there's certain things like that. I guess
Yeah,
other
like
sorry, go ahead.
there's a kobold at the end of the hallway, and you want to cast your burning hands, and you could angle your cone to the left, or you could angle the cone to your right.
Yeah.
Your player's not going to know what's around that corner, but the character's not going to know what's around that corner, but the player knows if I angle it to the left, I'm actually going to get the other kobold who's behind the corner, right?
Yeah.
So and that's something that doesn't need to be called out, because in world that that character, it's got a 50-50 chance. So, they're gonna either aim it to the left or they're gonna aim it to the right, whatever.
And that would be, I feel like at that point that'd be kind of nitpicky, because I feel like the board play, there has to be kind of like a tactical reasoning, as far as like placement of spells or like reasons for movement. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's a fine thing to do in my eyes, and like it's something that like if they are if as a player like they notice something on the board that they could hit with this huge spell, but they're like, oh, but my character only sees this one in front of me, so I'm gonna pull it back and only hit this singular one, and then like all the players like side eye them like, what are you doing? Like it's fine. It's
Right.
like I'm sure the DM is going to be like, in their mind, they're like, oh, that kobold is going to rush out anyways. Like they know they're there, so why not have it be kind of equal in that sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as like other good metagaming, I'm trying to rack my brain about like, I guess it would be kind of like in the sense of, it kind of goes both ways in my mind where, charismatic or intelligent, characters,
Right.
you yourself, you're playing a character for a reason. And even if you are not the most charismatic, even if you are not the most intelligent, you can, just do the rolls. That's why they're there. That's why you can do an arcana or investigation check, with a roll. You can do a persuasion or whatever with a roll. You don't have to, voice out or sing.
Right.
Whereas the opposite can also kind of be in effect for me. And this, I guess this is kind of metagamey, where it's like maybe my player is smart. Let's say they have their character has like a 8 intelligence or a 10, but the player is smart and they're like, they figure out the puzzle, but there's no way that their character would figure out the puzzle or think that, that through. But if they figured it out, it's like, well, why not? Like maybe there is something turning in the gears in their head that figured out, instead of an investigation check, figured out this puzzle, or found out a good way to convey a message to somebody in a persuasion. I'll probably still make them roll a persuasion just to see how it goes, but I'll do it like with advantage or something like that. But I feel like that kind of is a little bit metagamey, where it's like it's not something tied to their character stat wise or even mechanics wise, but them as a player did something good. So I think that can be a good thing, and it also keeps the game rolling, right? If no one
Right.
else, if they keep on rolling ones on investigation, it's like, well, the door is going to stay closed, I guess. That's where the story ends. GG. Like, I guess that's the only
Yeah.
other kind of metagamey thing that I can think is good.
Yeah. One good example of what you're talking about is my one of my daughters, when she was playing, she had a character who would always talk about her elven mother, right? So she looked up like little quotes of wisdom, and put them in a extra dice bag, and she would pull out these little quotes and just that was kind of her character shtick, right? She would just, well, my elven mother used to say, and she would, quote some, just random, words of advice. But as the game went on, her elf was a fighter archer, so high constitution, high dexterity, low wisdom and intelligence. So she figured out that she could use my elven mother used to say as a way to inject a solution that her character wasn't really smart enough to figure out.
I actually kind of like that. That's fun.
Yeah. So she came up with an in-world reason of how she could use her real-world intelligence with her character that wasn't as smart as she was.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool. We talk a lot about like PC versus player knowledge, right? But that's not always a bad thing. Like when you're a player and you realize, I'm not sure why my character would go on this adventure.
Right.
I'm not sure, so,
that in itself is a deep meta game for a lot of groups, I feel like.
Yeah, and that is actually, in my opinion, that kind of stuff is more problematic.
Yeah.
Than, well, I know trolls are resistant to fire, so I'm going to use fire, even though my character doesn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Actually slowing down the game by making the rest of the players convince you to go on every adventure because, your character is, a halfling who doesn't like, the outdoors. That's far more problematic in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
and like trolls are probably a rampart in the world anyways. Like, so there's probably like plenty of stories of people just being, or like even just normal knowledge in the world, just like, oh yeah, just they hate fire, just use fire. Like everyone knows that.
Silver with werewolves and
yeah,
holy water with vampires and fire with trolls. Like
you call yourself an adventure group and you don't know these basic things of these low level creatures. Oh man, once you hit a dragon, that's gonna be crazy. Good luck.
Yeah. But so there's a certain amount of player knowledge that goes into the fact that, hey, this is the game we're playing tonight. And even though my character might not, do these things, I'm going to role play some reason that they are sticking with the group.
Yeah. Perfect example and now that you're bringing this part up, it's like making me think about it. And yeah, there is in my game, there is three students in this university, crazy people doing whatever the heck they want. And then my newest player that joined in kind of mid-campaign is an ex-professor, very proper. And it's like he is having a rough time trying to, stay with this group and keep continuing with them. But him as a player is like, well, I want to keep playing the game. So I'm going to like just, he's just there. Like he's just going to do it. He's going along with it. And I gave them story things to connect them, and now they're invested. Like their character is invested, as well as the player, hopefully, in staying with the group and driving it forward. So, but that was like in my eyes when I first saw that happening. I'm like, oh no, this group does not mesh with this person. I need to figure something out. But thankfully, yeah, they kind of metagamed it and like stayed with the group instead of just being like, no, I'm not going to go with you. I'm going to go to my classroom. Goodbye. That is a good metagame for sure.
Yeah. And in one of my campaigns, I had a player and she, like her character didn't really fit the rest of the group. Like I planned out this like, political intrigue world and we ended up with like Muppet Treasure Island because, because everybody made like, furry characters, right? There was like two tabaxis and a rabbit folk where they're herringons.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody made is it Lokatha, the fish people, right? And they, stole the ship and they all became pirates. It was it was literally about as close to Muppet Treasure Island as you could get.
That's awesome.
And so the one player, her character kind of became the mom of the group, right? So even though she didn't like a lot of the things the group did, she role played it as, I feel responsible for them, and I'm going to try to keep them out of trouble.
Gotcha.
So she was constantly going on these zany adventures, even though she didn't really agree with the end goal.
Yeah.
But she was like, these people are my friends, and I care about them, and so I'm reluctantly going because I want to not see them get dead.
I mean, that's also literally one of the story beats that I did for my character that I just talked about. Was he looked up to one of the deans, and they like were in cahoots with each other, and he had a heart to heart with him, just like, this is your time. These are your apprentices. You have to protect them, make them flourish. You don't have students anymore, but this can be your classroom, like that kind of thing. And I was like, hopefully that's one little thing and then I gave him other things, but I was just like, here's one reason to stay with this group, make sure they don't die, So
right. Yeah. And so and then the rest of the examples, that I have are all the things we tell DMs to do. Like all the good DM advice we give, most of it is metagame stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Like think about your players. Are they having fun? Create a character-driven plot. Share the spotlight. Think about upbeats and downbeats, and don't let, too many downbeats go in a row, because it's going to feel depressing or dangerous, and and then you're going to kill the fun. So you want to make sure you inject some humor or some upbeats, and not have everything be Dark Souls all the time.
Yeah,
right?
if it was like lock and key, and certain areas, like if you had the mental capacity to do this, and you just had roaming creatures all the time of varying levels of danger, you could easily, oh, sorry, this is just what happened in my world. A CR12 character going against a CR2 party. Like that could very much happen. And you have to metagame the encounters, the puzzles or whatever. I even get to the point where I have puzzles where I don't have an answer for, and I just wait until they do something cool. And I'm like, yeah, cool, you did it. That's
right.
metagamey. Because I just want to have a story for them to play through and have fun with, and not have to think about like you just said, everything being Dark Soulsy, or everything being lock and key, like, oh, you didn't do the thing exactly the way it needed to be, therefore you're stuck and can't progress. Guess you go somewhere else, or just camp out. I don't know.
Right. Like the advice we give DMs, in response to that lock and key scenario, right, is find ways for your players to fail forward, right? They botched the roll, their character didn't do the thing that they wanted to do, but how do you make sure that keeps moving the story forward? The story doesn't stall because they got a series of bad rolls in one particular scenario. The other thing we talk about is player choice. Giving players options, and that's metagamey too, right? Because there's several times where I if I'm really role playing my villain, I know what they would do. They would center all their forces and go kill these adventurers who keep mucking up their plans.
Yeah.
Right. But that's not going to make it very fun for the players.
Yeah.
Right. So I metagame, and I just like the player who finds a way for their character to stay with the group. I find a way for my villain to have multiple things going on to explain why he just doesn't show up and crush the players himself.
Right.
You go Thanos on them. Time for me to do this myself, or whatever.
Like,
it was.
I could just imagine, the big bad just in their fortress, just looking at the reports from all these scouts, just like, oh, this low level newfound party is kind of making their way through. Oh, they killed one of my captains. We'll keep tabs on them, but we won't do anything in the meantime. Anyways, we're just gonna sit here and wait now. Are they level 10 yet? I don't. Okay. Now it's time. Like,
oh, they're level 10 now. Now I can go out and face them. Right. Yeah. So so that there's all sorts of DM advice we give to help build that verisimilitude, make the game feel like it's a living, active world. But almost all of that advice is metagaming.
Yeah.
Right. So we tell the DM you have to metagame in order to make it a good experience for your players, but then we tell players don't metagame
Yeah.
because it's bad.
Yeah. I do believe when we say players don't metagame, it's definitely more so inclined towards the things that I talked about before, where it's like almost more of like, well, obviously if people are just speed running through a module that they've played before or know before, whatever, or if they're doing the thing, and this is just an annoyance with like, I feel bad for the other player and like also just for the table honesty, is when something happens secretive with one and the other person is just like, the player knows it, so they're like really like trying to hone in on figuring that out with the character for no reason. Like, yeah, those are the only two that I can really think in my mind that are really truly bad in my head.
Yeah, and so really, when metagaming becomes bad, it's like anything else in the game, right? If you are starting to spoil somebody else's fun, that's a problem,
Hmm.
right? So that's really the metagaming that is not good, right? Is
Hmm.
when you're trying to, steal the spotlight or spoil somebody else's fun, right? And there's plenty of ways to do that without metagaming, right?
Yeah.
You can steal the spotlight in other ways. You can spoil somebody else's fun in other ways,
Yeah.
right? Um, so so yeah, as a whole, I don't think metagaming is as bad of a bugaboo as we make it out to be.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of us metagame far more often than we realize, and we're most of the time doing it with good intention.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a board game, and there are some like player advantages that should come through. But yeah, I think it just gets uh, heavily talked about with such passion because of the fact that it's probably caused drama immediately at the table with the spoiling of other people's fun, because people
Right.
will like stop play and be like, "Hey, what the hell, dude? Like, blah blah blah. Like, no, this isn't fair. I did this secretively. This is what I did. Blah blah blah." So, um,
Yeah.
my own, before we go into the next one, my own advice that I would say for a metagame thing for DMs is for doors specifically. A locked door is one of the crux of many campaigns. And you were talking about having them fail forward. So one thing that I've done is if they don't get the lock pick, right, is instead of like, all right, we're just going to keep on trying to roll this until it hits, and then that just becomes boring. Is that it could be a multitude of things. It could be you don't pick the lock, but all of a sudden you hear shuffling from the inside and voices getting closer towards the door, so they can have a chance to hide. And then someone opens the door, and then they can ambush. So that causes an encounter or a therefore type of scenario. Or like even if it's somewhere that's completely devoid of people, somewhere that's completely abandoned, there's no reason for a person to go to the door. They could do it something where it's like they fail, so they like their lockpick breaks, and they kind of like shift over and hit like a candelabra that spikes it and that makes a trap happen that maybe like slams the door and breaks it, but almost like hurts them, and they have to do like a dex throw. So it's like something bad still happens. The good doesn't happen from like if they completely lockpicked it, they're fine, go through stealthily. But because they failed, they still advance, but something happens because of that. Instead of just like
Right.
keep rolling. Nope, didn't hit it. Nope, didn't hit it. All right, I guess you guys are just stuck, that type of
Right.
thing. Like have a reason of them to progress, maybe with like a penalty of some kind or an option to for that.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that sets up the scenario where like the rogue has tried 3 times and failed, and so the barbarian steps up and says, "Let me try," and they roll
Yeah.
a nat 20,
Yeah.
right? Which doesn't make sense that the barbarian would be a lot better than the rogue. But yeah, so that whole being creative and failing forward is a great example of metagaming. And as a player, like another advice to players is you can do that to help share the spotlight with other characters,
Yeah.
right? So like in a social encounter, if you're the bard and you're like getting these ridiculously high rolls and you're persuading one person after another, and essentially the entire social encounter is becoming all about the bard, you can turn to the elf wizard and say, "Hey, you're an elf. You know about this. Tell them, from your elf perspective, why it would be important to believe what we're saying, right?" Or you can turn to the barbarian and say, "Hey, well, tell them the story about your people and how they defeated the hobgoblins back in your father's day, right?" So you're bringing the other players into the spotlight. Like your player's good at this, or your character's good at this, so you've drawn the spotlight onto your character. Now share it with somebody else. Like that's another really good way to metagame that addresses a lot of the issues we talked about when we were talking about game balance, right?
Yeah.
So
Cool.
You can even do that in combat. I just thought of that. Like your fighter character that's can turn huge and arm wrestle the dragon, right? Or put the dragon in a headlock. They could say, and I also turn to the wizard and turn the dragon's underbelly towards the wizard, so when they cast their spell, they get advantage to hit or something like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that was, I mean, that kind of happened. Not to get too deep into this it was awesome though. But they're on an airship. I had 2 different maps. I had a weather effect that was gonna like jostle the ship, and I also had they were in a canyon where if they went one way or the other too closely, the ship would crash and take damage based on a roll or whatever. But yeah, the fairy monk fighter person became huge, was head locking the dragon, and flew them off of the ship so it wasn't damaging the ship or hitting this crystal stuff. I have another character who has combined 2 magic items through artificing and stuff like that. It was the ring of jumping and the boots of spring and stride, or whatever they're called. So he can, if he was a Haringen, he could literally jump like a mile or something crazy. But like even without that, he can jump hundreds of feet. And so he dashed and jumped off the ship, hit him with a smite attack, and then landed on one of the cliff things, rolled an insane athletics check, so he was fine. But then jumped back onto the ferry flying around, and it's like he rode his fairy friend into the other dragon as the fairy attacked him. And I was just like, if you can flavor this right, you can use your reaction to attack once more and also have it with advantage. And he's like, yeah, so I like run down the arm of Petra and like hit this dragon with my smite again. I'm just like, holy yes, do this. and this was also another metagaming thing that I did. It was that after these attacks, it landed on like 1 or 2 HP, and I just killed the creature. I was just like, how do you want to do that? Like, that was too cool of an end to have it be like, you do all this, and then someone does a fire bolt and kills it for real. Yeah. Right. I was like, this has to be, I will metagame this part. This has to be the end.
Yeah. And those are all great examples of like, metagaming. And what those examples show is how doing a little bit of metagaming can turn, an otherwise sounds like a pretty complicated encounter when you had so much going on into a very cinematic scene.
Yeah.
Right. And it's those cinematic scenes that really stick in everybody's memory. Like, do you remember that time that, I bounced off the canyon wall and, you were wrestling the dragon? Like, it's those cinematic scenes where those are the perfect time to insert rule of cool and, do a little bit of metagaming to really make that scene as cinematic as possible.
Yeah. And I guess to tie in with also the kind of metagaming thing is that after we were done and we're just kind of like chilling out after the session, is they were like, yeah, we've been talking about this for like weeks of like what kind of weird, BS we can do with riding on top of each other or grappling, whatever for movement speed enhancements. And I'm just like, you know what? Like, let's, not everything in game has to be said in game. Maybe on a downtime during a long rest, you stayed up late at night, just be like, hey, I wonder what we can do with this. Like, and then that's the reasoning. Like, it's not even technically metagaming, even though it was, but it's like, it makes sense. Fine. Whatever. Cool. Yeah. It's awesome. It's awesome. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The players don't have the player characters don't have the X-Men danger room to practice in, but somewhere they figured out a way that, hey, if I do this when you do that,
Mhm.
that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of wraps up one of our other myths here, is that metagaming is not as bad as everybody makes it out to be.
Agreed.
And we do it far more often than we realize, and most of it's for the good. So once again, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, throw your comments down below. Let us know how wrong we are, how right we are, or how crazy we are.
And what you want us to talk about next. Thanks again for watching. Later.